My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I've never been one for ghost stories. Growing up in Syracuse, New York, I was the kid who'd scoff at tales of haunted houses or cursed woods, the one who'd rather crunch numbers than chase shadows. I'm an accountant, or at least I was until the firm I worked for downsized last spring, leaving me with a severance check and a bruised ego. At 32, I was tired of renting, tired of throwing money into someone else's pocket. So when I found a listing for a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx for $150,000, a steal in this market, I jumped at it. Hawthorne Towers, the listing said. A foreclosure, a fixer-upper, but mine. I could deal with peeling paint and creaky floors if it meant owning something. The real estate agent, Mitch, was a wiry guy with a comb-over and a nervous laugh. He met me outside the building on a drizzly October morning, the kind of day where the Bronx feels like it's sulking under a gray blanket. Hawthorne Towers loomed over the street, a 14-story relic from the 1920s, all faded Art Deco charm, ornate brass fixtures in the lobby, chipped marble floors, and an elevator that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Great Depression. Mitch kept talking up the character of the place, but I noticed he avoided eye contact when I asked about the previous owner. "They just moved out quick," he said, shoving the keys into my hand. "Family stuff, you know?" I didn't press him. I'd done my due diligence, checked the title, ran the numbers. No liens, no red flags. The building was old, sure, but it was solid. I signed the papers that afternoon, and by the next week, I was moving in. The movers, a couple of guys from a local outfit, were in and out in 3 hours, leaving me with a stack of cardboard boxes and a mattress on the floor of apartment 12C. The place wasn't bad for the price: high ceilings, big windows with a view of the city skyline if you squinted past the fire escapes, but it was quiet. Too quiet. No neighbors knocked to say hi, no kids ran through the halls. Just the hum of the radiator and the occasional groan of the building settling. I spent the first day unpacking, trying to make the place feel like home. The apartment had good bones, original hardwood floors, crown molding that must have been stunning back in the day. But there was something off about it. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I chalked it up to the weather. October in New York can do that to you, makes everything feel a little gloomier than it should. The first night. That night, I couldn't sleep. Maybe it was the new place, or maybe it was the fact that I'd sunk every penny of my savings into this apartment. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on tossing and turning and decided to explore. I threw on a hoodie and grabbed my keys, figuring I'd check out the rooftop. Mitch had mentioned it had a view, and I could use some air. The hallway outside my apartment was dim, lit by flickering sconces that cast long shadows on the faded wallpaper. The air smelled of old wood and something faintly metallic, like rust or pennies. The elevator was at the end of the hall, a hulking brass and wood contraption with a dial that ticked like a grandfather clock. I pressed the button for the roof, and the thing lurched upward with a groan. But instead of climbing straight to the top, it stopped with a jolt. The dial clicked to 13. I frowned. Everyone knows buildings like this skip the 13th floor. Superstition runs deep in old places like Hawthorne Towers. The dial should have gone from 12 to 14. But there it was, clear as day, 13. The doors slid open with a slow, grinding hiss. I should have stayed in the elevator. I should have hit the button for my floor and gone back to bed. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped out into a hallway that looked almost identical to mine, same wallpaper, same creaky floorboards, but it felt wrong. The air was colder, sharper, like stepping into a meat locker. The single bulb at the far end of the hall flickered, casting shadows that seemed to twist when I wasn't looking. My sneakers squeaked on the floor, the sound echoing louder than it should have. That's when I saw it, a piece of paper taped to the wall, yellowed and curling at the edges. In neat, handwritten script, it listed 10 rules. I don't know why I read it. Maybe it was the late hour, or maybe it was the way the air seemed to press against my chest. But as I stood there, the words seared into my brain, each one dripping with a quiet menace. The rules for surviving the 13th floor. 1. Never look into a mirror on this floor after midnight. If you do, you'll see someone standing behind you. It's not you. 2. If you hear knocking at a door, count exactly 7 knocks before opening it. Fewer or more means it's not a neighbor. Don't let it in. 3. Avoid apartment 13B at all costs. The door might be open, or you might see a light spilling out. Ignore it. It wants you to notice. 4. If you see a child in a white dress at the end of the hall, turn around and walk away. Do not meet her eyes. She's not a child. 5. Do not use the elevator if it stops at 13 unprompted. Take the stairs. If you're already inside, press the emergency button and pray it moves. 6. If the lights flicker 3 times in a row, leave the floor immediately. Something is waking up. 7. Never speak your full name out loud on this floor. It will hear you, and it will follow you home. 8. If you find a key marked 13, do not pick it up. It unlocks something that should stay closed. 9. Do not trust the clocks on this floor. They lie. Time moves differently here. 10. If you feel a hand on your shoulder but no one is there, do not turn around. Keep walking until you're off the floor. I stood there, my breath catching in my throat. The rules were absurd, like something a teenager would scribble to freak out their friends. But the longer I stood in that hallway, the heavier the air felt, like it was pressing me into the floor. The shadows seemed to creep closer, and the bulb at the end of the hall flickered again, slower this time, like a heartbeat. I backed into the elevator, my finger jabbing the button for 12. The doors closed, and I didn't breathe until I was back in my apartment, locking the door and shoving a chair under the handle. I told myself it was a prank. Some weird tenant hazing ritual, or maybe a leftover from a Halloween party. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I just brushed up against something I wasn't supposed to see. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the radiator, sounded like it was coming from that hallway. The morning after. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed, blurry-eyed and jittery from too much coffee. I needed answers. I headed down to the lobby to find Carl, the building superintendent. He was an older guy, maybe in his 60s, with a face like weathered leather and a permanent scowl. I found him tinkering with a pipe in the basement, the air thick with the smell of mildew. "Hey, Carl," I said, trying to sound casual. "What's the deal with the 13th floor?" He froze, his wrench clattering against the pipe. For a second, I thought he was going to bolt. "Ain't no 13th floor," he said finally, not looking at me. "Building skips it. Old superstition." "Then why'd the elevator stop there last night?" I pressed. "I saw it, Carl. The dial said 13, and there was a hallway. Even had a list of rules taped to the wall." His eyes flicked up, sharp and wary. "You didn't go in, did you?" I hesitated. Just for a second. Looked like any other floor, but creepy. "Quirks?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Like a whole floor that doesn't exist?" He didn't answer, just turned back to his pipe. I knew I wasn't getting anything else out of him, so I headed back upstairs. But his reaction stuck with me. He hadn't laughed it off or called me crazy. He'd looked scared. Digging deeper. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself, unpacking boxes and setting up my Wi-Fi. But my mind kept drifting back to that hallway, those rules. Around noon, I fired up my laptop and started digging into the history of Hawthorne Towers. The internet wasn't much help, Mostly generic real estate listings and a few old articles about the building's construction in 1923. It had been a luxury residence back then, home to jazz musicians and minor politicians. But the records were spotty. No mention of a 13th floor, no blueprints, nothing about why the previous owner had bailed. I did find one thing, though, a grainy newspaper clipping from 1934, buried in an archive of the Bronx Times. It mentioned a fire on the upper floors of Hawthorne Towers, with 3 deaths. The article was vague, no names or specifics, just a note that the building had been temporarily evacuated. I bookmarked it, figuring I'd swing by the local library later to see if they had anything more. By evening, the unease was back. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to hear 7 knocks. I tried to laugh it off, but the apartment felt smaller, the walls closer. Around 9 p.m., I heard a faint tapping from the hallway. Not knocks, just a soft, rhythmic tap tap tap, like someone dragging their nails along the wall. I froze, my heart thudding. It stopped after a few seconds, but I didn't move until I was sure it was gone. The neighbor. The next day, I decided to talk to the neighbors. If anyone knew about the 13th floor, it'd be the people living here. I started with the apartment across the hall, 12D. The woman who answered was in her 70s, with tight gray curls and a pair of glasses perched on her nose. Her name was Mrs. Delgado, and she lived in the building since the 80s. 13th floor? She said when I asked, her voice sharp. No such thing, young man. You must have misread the elevator. I saw it, I insisted. And there was this list of rules, taped to the wall. Something about mirrors and a kid in a white dress. Her face tightened, and she gripped the door frame. You listen to me, she said, her voice low. Don't go up there again. And don't talk about it, not to anyone. This building. It's got its ways. Ways? I said. What does that mean? She shook her head and shut the door, leaving me standing in the hallway like an idiot. I tried a few other apartments, but no one answered. Either they weren't home, or they didn't want to talk. By the time I got back to 12C, I was more frustrated than scared. But that changed when I found the note. It was slipped under my door, a single sheet of paper, folded in half. The handwriting was the same as the rules on the 13th floor, neat, almost too perfect. It said, "Welcome to Hawthorne Towers, Ethan. Follow the rules. They're for your own good." My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone my name, not even Mrs. Delgado. I turned the paper over, looking for a signature, but there was nothing. Just those words, staring up at me like a warning. The second visit. I should have left it alone. I should have packed a bag and crashed at a motel. But I'm stubborn, and I'd sunk everything I had into this place. Besides, I didn't believe in ghosts. Not yet. So that night, when I couldn't sleep again, I grabbed a flashlight and headed back to the elevator. I told myself I just wanted to see if it would happen again, to prove it was a fluke. Deep down, though, I knew I was chasing something I didn't understand. The elevator stopped at 13 again. This time, I was ready for it. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the dim hallway. The air was colder than before, sharp enough to make my breath catch. The rules were still there, taped to the wall, but the paper looked older, the edges more brittle. I read them again, committing each one to memory. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I just needed to feel like I had some control. I walked down the hall, my flashlight sweeping over the doors. They were all numbered, 13A, 13C, 13D, but 13B stood out. The door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of yellow light spilling into the hallway. Rule number 3 flashed in my mind, avoid apartment 13B at all costs. I turned away, my pulse racing, but then I heard it, a soft giggle, like a child's. coming from inside. I froze. My flashlight beam shook as I aimed it at the door. The giggle came again, louder this time, followed by a whisper. "Ethan," it said, clear as day. My blood ran cold. I hadn't said my name out loud, not once. I backed away, my sneakers squeaking on the floorboards. The door creaked open wider, and I caught a glimpse of something moving inside, a flash of white fabric, like a dress. I ran. I didn't care about the rules or the flashlight or anything else. I bolted for the elevator, slamming the button until the doors closed. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door, shoved the couch against it, and sat there, heart pounding, until the sun came up. The library. The next morning, I headed to the Bronx Library Center, determined to find answers. The building's history was my only lead, and I wasn't about to let some creepy hallway scare me out of my own home. The library was a modern glass and steel building, a stark contrast to Hawthorne Towers. I spent hours combing through microfilm and old newspapers, my eyes burning from the grainy text. I found more about the 1934 fire. It hadn't just been a fire, it was a murder-suicide. A tenant on the upper floors had killed his family, then set the apartment ablaze. The article didn't specify which floor, but it mentioned a daughter, age 8, who died in the fire. Her name was Clara. The details were sparse, but one line stuck out: the surviving tenants reported strange occurrences in the building, including unexplained noises and sightings of a young girl. I leaned back in my chair, my mouth dry. A young girl. In a white dress, maybe? I tried to shake it off, but the note under my door, the giggle, the rules, they were all starting to add up to something I didn't want to believe. I dug deeper, finding a few more scraps. A 1950s article about a tenant who'd gone missing after complaining about strange visitors at night. A 1970s police report about a break-in at Hawthorne Towers, with the suspect claiming he'd been called to the 13th floor. Nothing concrete, but enough to make my skin crawl. The third night. By the time I got back to the building, it was dark. The lobby was empty, the sconces casting their usual flickering glow. I avoided the elevator, taking the stairs to the 12th floor. My apartment felt different when I walked in, colder, somehow, even though the radiator was on. I checked the locks, the windows, everything. Nothing was out of place, but the note was still on my kitchen counter, its words glaring up at me. I tried to distract myself with TV, but the signal kept cutting out, static buzzing across the screen. Around midnight, I heard the tapping again, tap tap tap, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. I turned off the TV, my heart in my throat. The tapping stopped, replaced by a faint hum, like someone singing a lullaby. It was coming from the other side of my door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The hum grew louder, then faded, like whoever, whatever, was out there had moved on. I sat there for hours, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, I made a decision. I wasn't running. Not yet. But I needed to know what I was dealing with. And that meant going back to the 13th floor. The plan. Over the next few days, I prepared. I bought a cheap security camera, the kind you can monitor from your phone, and set it up in the hallway outside my apartment. I started keeping a journal, writing down every weird thing I noticed, the tapping, the hum, the way the clocks in my apartment seemed to lose a few minutes every night. I even sketched the layout of the 13th floor from memory, marking the position of 13B and the rules. I talked to Mrs. Delgado again, but she clammed up, refusing to say more than stay away. I tried Carl, too, but he just grunted and told me to stop asking questions. The other neighbors were no better, either they didn't know anything, or they didn't want to talk. I was on my own. On the 5th night, I decided to go back. I armed myself with a flashlight, a pocket knife, and a cross necklace I hadn't worn since I was a kid. I didn't know if it would help, but it made me feel better. I took the stairs this time, climbing to the 14th floor and then backtracking to find the door to 13. It was there, tucked behind a maintenance closet, a plain metal door with 13 painted in faded red letters. I pushed it open, and the cold hit me like a slap. The hallway was the same, but the air felt thicker, like wading through water. The rules were still on the wall, but the paper looked older, almost crumbling. I checked my watch, 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until midnight. I didn't know why, but I felt like I had to see what happened when the clock struck 12. I waited, my flashlight trained on the door to 13B. At exactly midnight, the bulb at the end of the hall flickered 3 times. Rule number 6, if the lights flicker 3 times in a row, leave the floor immediately. My stomach twisted, but I didn't move. I needed to know. The door to 13B creaked open, and the giggle came again, sharp and clear. "Ethan," the voice whispered, soft and sweet, like a child calling for a friend. I gripped my flashlight, my knuckles white. A shadow moved inside the apartment, small and quick, darting out of sight. I took a step forward, then stopped. Rule number 3, avoid apartment 13B at all costs. I turned to leave, but the hallway seemed longer now, the elevator farther away. The air grew colder, and I felt it, a hand on my shoulder, light but firm, like a child's. Rule number 10, if you feel a hand on your shoulder but no one is there, do not turn around. I froze, my breath hitching. The hand lingered, then let go. I walked, fast but steady, toward the elevator. I didn't look back. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door and checked the security camera footage. The hallway outside was empty, but at exactly midnight, the screen glitched, static swallowing the image for 3 seconds. When it cleared, there was a shadow at the edge of the frame, small, human-shaped, wearing what looked like a white dress. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for a long time, the weight of the unknown. The morning after my 3rd visit to the 13th floor, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My head throbbed, my eyes burned, and my apartment felt like it was closing in on me. The note, "Welcome to Hawthorne Towers, Ethan. Follow the rules. They're for your own good," sat on my kitchen counter, its neat handwriting mocking me. I hadn't slept more than a couple of hours since the night in the hallway, when I'd felt that cold, invisible hand on my shoulder. The security camera footage, with its glimpse of a small shadow in a white dress, played on a loop in my mind. I kept telling myself it was a trick of the light, a glitch in the camera. But deep down, I knew better. I'm not a superstitious guy. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or whatever late-night Reddit threads like to ramble about. But Hawthorne Towers was testing that. The rules, the giggle, the way my name seemed to echo in that empty hallway, it was all too real to dismiss. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to find them sitting in my apartment, jumping at every creak. I started with the basics. I checked the camera footage again, frame by frame, on my laptop. The shadow was there, unmistakable, standing at the edge of the hallway at exactly midnight. It wasn't just a blur, it had shape. A small figure in what looked like a dress, had tilted slightly as if watching the camera. The footage cut to static for 3 seconds, then cleared, and the figure was gone. I rewound it a dozen times, my stomach twisting. There was no way someone could have gotten in and out of the hallway that fast, not without the camera catching them. I decided to go back to the library. The 1934 article about the fire had mentioned a girl named Clara, and that name was starting to feel like a key. If I could find out more about her, maybe I could figure out what was happening on the 13th floor. I grabbed my jacket, stuffed the note in my pocket, and headed out, avoiding the elevator. The stairs were safer, even if they smelled like mildew and made my knees ache. The Bronx Library Center was quiet for a Thursday morning, just a few retirees browsing the stacks and a bored librarian at the desk. I went straight for the microfilm room, pulling every record I could find on Hawthorne Towers. The 1934 fire was my starting point, but I needed more: names, dates, anything that could explain why a floor that didn't exist was haunting my life. The fire article was sparse, but I found another piece from 1935 in the New York Daily News. It mentioned the tenant, a man named Henry Whitaker, who'd killed his wife and daughter before setting their apartment ablaze. The daughter was Clara Whitaker, age 8. The article didn't say which floor, but it noted that Henry had been unstable, claiming he heard voices telling him to protect the building. The fire had gutted part of the upper floors, and the surviving tenants had reported unsettling incidents afterward: knocking sounds, flickering lights, and sightings of a young girl in a white dress. The article dismissed it as hysteria, but I wasn't so sure anymore. I kept digging, pulling records from the 1940s and 50s. There wasn't much, but I found a pattern. Every decade or so, someone in Hawthorne Towers went missing or died under strange circumstances. In 1947, a tenant on the 12th floor vanished after telling friends he'd seen a girl in the hallway. In 1963, a janitor was found dead in the basement, his eyes wide open, clutching a key marked 13. In 1982, a woman claimed she'd been locked in her apartment for 3 days, hearing whispers through the walls. The police chalked it up to mental illness, but I was starting to see a connection. By noon, my notebook was filled with scribbled dates and names. Henry Whitaker, Clara, the missing tenants, it all pointed back to the 13th floor. I needed to know more about the building itself, so I requested the original blueprints from the city archives. The librarian warned me it could take a few days, but I left my contact info and headed back to the building, my mind racing. The new face. When I got back to Hawthorne Towers, the lobby was empty except for a woman I hadn't seen before. She was in her late 20s, with short dark hair and a leather jacket, leaning against the wall near the mailboxes. She was reading something on her phone, but she looked up when I walked in, her eyes sharp and curious. "You're the new guy, right?" she said, pocketing her phone. 12C? I nodded, caught off guard. "Yeah. Ethan. You live here?" "Rachel Torres," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, almost too firm. 10B. "I've been here a couple of years. Heard you've been asking about the 13th floor." I froze. I hadn't told anyone except Carl and Mrs. Delgado, and they'd both shut me down. "Who told you that?" She smirked. "Word gets around. Old buildings like this, people talk. So, what's the deal? You see something up there?" I hesitated. Rachel didn't seem like the type to buy into ghost stories, but I wasn't ready to spill everything. "Just weird stuff," I said. "Elevator stopped at 13. There's a hallway, some rules on the wall. Creepy, but probably nothing." Her smirk faded, and her eyes narrowed. "Rules? Like what?" I pulled the note from my pocket, the one slipped under my door, and handed it to her. She read it, her expression unreadable. "This is new," she said finally, handing it back. "You been up there more than once?" "Twice," I admitted. "Saw the rules the first time, heard something the second." "You know anything about it?" She glanced around the lobby, like she was checking for eavesdroppers. "Meet me at the diner across the street tonight, 7 p.m. we'll talk." Before I could ask more, she turned and headed for the stairs, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. The librarian warned me it could take a few days, but I left my contact info and headed back to the building, my mind racing. The new face. When I got back to Hawthorne Towers, the lobby was empty except for a woman I hadn't seen before. She was in her late 20s, with short dark hair and a leather jacket, leaning against the wall near the mailboxes. She was reading something on her phone, but she looked up when I walked in, her eyes sharp and curious. "You're the new guy, right?" she said, pocketing her phone. 12C? I nodded, caught off guard. "Yeah. Ethan. You live here?" "Rachel Torres," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, almost too firm. 10B. "I've been here a couple of years. Heard you've been asking about the 13th floor." I froze. I hadn't told anyone except Carl and Mrs. Delgado, and they'd both shut me down. "Who told you that?" She smirked. "Word gets around. Old buildings like this, people talk. So, what's the deal? You see something up there?" I hesitated. Rachel didn't seem like the type to buy into ghost stories, but I wasn't ready to spill everything. "Just weird stuff," I said. "Elevator stopped at 13. There's a hallway, some rules on the wall. Creepy, but probably nothing." Her smirk faded, and her eyes narrowed. "Rules? Like what?" I pulled the note from my pocket, the one slipped under my door, and handed it to her. She read it, her expression unreadable. "This is new," she said finally, handing it back. "You been up there more than once?" "Twice," I admitted. "Saw the rules the first time, heard something the second." "You know anything about it?" She glanced around the lobby, like she was checking for eavesdroppers. "Meet me at the diner across the street tonight, 7 p.m. we'll talk." Before I could ask more, she turned and headed for the stairs, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. The diner. The diner was a classic Bronx greasy spoon, neon sign, chipped Formica tables, and the smell of burnt coffee. I got there early, grabbing a booth in the back. Rachel showed up right on time, sliding into the seat across from me with a cup of black coffee in her hand. She didn't waste time on small talk. "I'm a journalist," she said, stirring her coffee. "Freelance, mostly for local papers. Been digging into Hawthorne Towers for a while. You're not the first to ask about the 13th floor." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "What do you know?" She pulled a small notebook from her jacket, flipping it open. "This place has a history. People go missing, or they die, and it's always the same story. Strange noises, shadows, a girl in a white dress. Started with the fire in 34. Henry Whitaker killed his family, claimed something in the building made him do it. After that, every few years, someone else gets caught up in it." "Caught up in what?" I asked, my voice low. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "The 13th floor isn't just a floor. It's a place. A trap. Something's there, Ethan, and it's been there since the building went up. The rules you saw? They're not a prank. They're a warning." I wanted to laugh, to tell her she'd been reading too many horror stories. But the memory of that giggle, that hand on my shoulder, stopped me. "So what's it want?" I said instead. Rachel shook her head. "I don't know. But I've talked to people, old tenants, maintenance workers. They all say the same thing, stay away from 13. The ones who don't, they don't last long." I told her about my trips to the 13th floor, the rules, the shadow, and the camera footage. She listened, her face grim. When I mentioned Clara, she froze. "Clara Whitaker?" she said. "The girl from the fire?" "Yeah. You know about her?" She flipped through her notebook, pulling out a photocopy of an old photo. It was grainy, black and white, showing a family of 3. The girl in the center, maybe 8 years old, wore a white dress and stared at the camera with empty, unblinking eyes. My stomach twisted. It was her. The shadow from the footage, the giggle in the hallway. "That's her," I said, my voice barely audible. Rachel nodded. "I've been trying to find out what happened to her. The fire didn't just kill her, it changed something in the building." "Like it?" woke something up. We sat in silence for a moment, the diner's hum fading into the background. I didn't want to believe her, but I couldn't deny what I'd seen. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We find out what's on the 13th floor, she said. "And we stop it." The plan. Rachel's plan was simple but insane: go to the 13th floor, document everything, and figure out what the rules were protecting us from. She had a theory that the floor was a kind of anchor, holding something in place, and the rules were a way to keep it contained. Break too many, and it might get out. I wasn't sold, but I didn't have a better idea. We agreed to go the next night, armed with cameras, flashlights, and a voice recorder. Rachel also brought a small leather pouch, which she said contained salt and sage, just in case. I didn't argue. At this point, I was willing to try anything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the camera feed, but the hallway was empty. Around 3 a.m., I heard the tapping again, tap tap tap, slow and deliberate, like nails on wood. I checked the camera, but there was nothing. Just an empty hallway, the sconces flickering faintly. I tried to ignore it, but the sound grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was coming from inside my apartment. I grabbed my flashlight and checked every room, my heart pounding. The tapping stopped, but when I got to the bathroom, the mirror was fogged up, like someone had breathed on it. In the center, written in shaky, uneven letters, was my name, Ethan Caldwell. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. Rule number 7, never speak your full name out loud on this floor. I hadn't, not on the 13th floor, but I'd said it in the diner, to Rachel. Had something heard me? Was it here, in my apartment? I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the couch, flashlight in hand, watching the door until dawn. The 4th visit. The next night, Rachel met me in the lobby at 11 p.m. She was dressed in black, a backpack slung over one shoulder, her face set with determination. I felt like I was walking into a horror movie, but I couldn't back out now. We took the stairs, climbing to the 14th floor and finding the door to 13 behind the maintenance closet. It was still there, the red 13 faded but unmistakable. The air was colder than before, heavy with that metallic smell. The rules were on the wall, the paper crumbling at the edges. Rachel snapped photos, her camera flashing in the dim light. I kept my flashlight trained on the door to 13B, my stomach churning. It was closed, but I could feel it watching us. "Let's check the hallway first," Rachel whispered. "Stay close." We moved slowly, our footsteps echoing. The bulb at the end of the hall flickered, and I counted, 1, 2, 3. Rule number 6. "Rachel," I hissed. "The lights." She nodded, her face pale. "We need to move fast." We reached the end of the hall, where a small table stood against the wall. On it was a clock, its hands frozen at 12 o'clock. Rule number 9, do not trust the clocks on this floor. I checked my watch, 11:45 p.m. but when I looked again, it was 12:03 a.m. My heart sank. Time was already slipping. Rachel was photographing the doors, each one identical except for 13B. It was ajar again, a sliver of yellow light spilling out. "Don't look," I said, grabbing her arm. Rule 3, she nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the door. "We need to know what's in there," she said. "If we're going to stop this, we need to see it." I shook my head. "That's a bad idea. The rules. The rules are keeping us alive," she cut me off. "But they're also keeping us in the dark. We need to know what we're dealing with." Before I could stop her, she stepped toward 13B. The door creaked open wider, and the giggle came again, sharp and clear. "Rachel," it whispered, and I froze. It knew her name too. Rachel stopped, her camera shaking in her hands. "Did you hear that?" she said, her voice trembling. "Yeah, I said. "We need to go. Now." But it was too late. The lights flickered 3 times, and the air turned ice cold. The door to 13B swung open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. In the center stood a girl in a white dress, her back to us. Her hair was long and dark, falling past her shoulders. She was humming, a soft, eerie lullaby that made my skin crawl. "Clara," Rachel whispered, and the girl stopped humming. Slowly, she turned, her face pale and hollow, her eyes black pits that seemed to swallow the light. She smiled, and it was wrong, too wide, too sharp, like something wearing a child's skin. I grabbed Rachel's arm and pulled her back, my flashlight beam shaking. "Run," I said, and we bolted for the elevator. The girl didn't move, but her giggle followed us, echoing through the hallway. The elevator doors opened, and we stumbled inside, slamming the button for 12. As the doors closed, I saw her standing at the end of the hall, still smiling. The aftermath. Back in my apartment, we locked the door and sat in silence, our breaths ragged. Rachel's hands were shaking as she checked her camera. The photos of the hallway were there, but the ones of 13B were black, like the camera had failed. The voice recorder had caught the giggle, though, in the sound of Clara's voice saying our names. "We broke the rules," I said, my voice hoarse. We looked at her. "We went near 13B. Rachel nodded, her face pale. "And now it knows us." I didn't want to ask what that meant, but I could feel it, the weight of something watching, waiting. The apartment felt smaller, the air heavier. My watch was still off, ticking backward now, the hands spinning slowly in the wrong direction. "We need to find the key," Rachel said finally. "The one in Rule 8. If it unlocks something, maybe it's the way to stop this." I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. But I knew one thing, the 13th floor wasn't just a place. It was alive, and it wasn't going to let us go. The calm before the storm. I hadn't slept in days, not really. The whispers followed me everywhere now, soft, insistent, calling my name even when I left Hawthorne Towers to grab coffee or check my mail. My watch was useless, the hands spinning backward 1 minute, frozen the next. Rule number 9, do not trust the clocks on this floor had bled into my apartment, my life. The mirrors were worse. Every time I passed one, I caught a glimpse of her, Clara, the girl in the white dress, her black pit eyes staring through me. I'd covered every mirror in my apartment with bedsheets, but it didn't help. She was there, in the corners of my vision, in the static of my TV, in the hum of the radiator. Rachel wasn't doing much better. When I met her in the lobby the morning after our last trip to the 13th floor, her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with dark circles. The burns on her hands, those strange, rune-like marks from the altar in 13B, had gotten worse, red and angry, like something was eating into her skin. She didn't talk about it, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We'd broken too many rules. Looking at Clara, going near 13B, saying our names. The 13th floor wasn't just a place anymore, it was a presence, and it was closing in. "We need to end this," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. We were at the diner again, the same greasy spoon across from the building. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on her notebook, now filled with sketches of the altar's symbols and notes about Clara Whitaker. "The key from Rule 8, it's our only shot. If it unlocks something, maybe it's the way to destroy whatever's up there." I nodded, but my stomach churned. The key marked 13 had appeared outside my door after our last visit, glinting under the hallway light like it wanted to be found. I hadn't touched it. Rule number 8 was clear, do not pick it up. But Rachel had taken it, slipping it into her pocket before I could stop her. She'd been different since then, quieter, more reckless, like something was driving her. "What if it's a trap?" I said. stirring my coffee. The rules exist for a reason. Every time we break one, things get worse. Rachel's eyes flashed. And if we do nothing? It's not going to stop, Ethan. You saw her. She knows us. She's not going to let us walk away. I couldn't argue with that. The giggle, the hand on my shoulder, the way my name appeared in the fogged-up mirror, it was personal now. Clara, or whatever she was, wasn't just haunting the 13th floor. She was haunting us. We spent the day preparing. Rachel had done more digging, pulling records from the city archives that confirmed the 1934 fire wasn't an accident. Henry Whitaker, Clara's father, had been part of a group that performed a ritual in the building's early days, something to bless it. The records were vague, but they mentioned a guardian meant to protect the tenants. Something had gone wrong, though, and the guardian had turned on them. The fire was Henry's attempt to destroy it, but it only made things worse. Clara's death had bound her to the building, or something had bound itself to her. Rachel's theory was that the key unlocked the altar in 13B, the one we'd found covered in strange symbols. If we could destroy it, we might break the cycle. It sounded like a long shot, but I didn't have a better plan. We agreed to go back that night, armed with everything we could think of: flashlights, cameras, Rachel's salt and sage pouch, and a crowbar I'd found in the basement. I even brought the cross necklace again, though I wasn't sure it would do any good. The final ascent. At 11 p.m., we stood in front of the door to the 13th floor, hidden behind the maintenance closet on the 14th. The red 13 was barely visible now, the paint peeling like dead skin. Rachel clutched the key, her knuckles white. I could feel the weight of the building pressing down on us, the air thick with that metallic smell, sharper now, like blood. "Ready?" Rachel said, her voice low. "No," I admitted, gripping the crowbar. "But let's do this." She pushed the door open, and the cold hit us like a wave. The hallway was different this time, longer, darker, the walls pulsing faintly, like they were breathing. The rules were still taped to the wall, but the paper was black at the edges, as if it had been burned. The bulb at the end of the hall was out, leaving only our flashlights to cut through the gloom. We moved slowly, staying close. The doors along the hallway were shut, except for 13B. It was wide open, the yellow light inside flickering like a dying star. The giggle came, soft at first, then louder, echoing from every direction. "Ethan," it whispered. "Rachel." I grabbed her arm. "Don't listen. Keep moving." We reached the door to 13B, and Rachel pulled out the key. It was small, brass, with 13 etched into the handle. The altar was inside, a low stone table covered in carvings, spirals, eyes, symbols that hurt to look at. A faint hum filled the room, like a heartbeat. In the center of the altar was a slot, just the right size for the key. "This is it," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "We unlock it, we end it." I didn't like it. The air was too heavy, the hum too loud. But before I could stop her, she slid the key into the slot and turned it. The room shook. The walls groaned, and the light from the altar flared, blinding us. The giggle turned into a scream, high and piercing, like 1,000 voices at once. I stumbled back, the crowbar slipping from my hand. Rachel grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. "We need to destroy it," she shouted over the noise. I swung the crowbar at the altar, the metal ringing against stone. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, and the scream grew louder, shaking the floor. Clara appeared in the doorway, her white dress stained with ash, her eyes blacker than before. She didn't move, just stared, her smile twisting into something monstrous. "Rachel, get back," I yelled, but she was already moving, pouring salt from her pouch onto the altar. The symbols glowed red, then faded, and the shaking stopped. For a moment, I thought we'd done it. Then Clara spoke, her voice a low growl that didn't belong to a child. "You can't leave." The room changed. The walls melted, stretching into a vast, dark void. The floor tilted, and I grabbed Rachel to keep from falling. Clara was everywhere now, her face in the shadows, her giggle in the air. The rules didn't matter anymore. We'd broken too many, and she was free. The sacrifice. Rachel's hand slipped from mine, and I turned to see her standing by the altar, the key glowing in her hand. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "I know what to do." Before I could stop her, she drove the key into the altar, deeper this time, twisting it until it snapped. The void shuddered, and Clara's scream became a wail. Light poured from the altar, blinding, burning. Rachel turned to me, her face pale but resolute. "Get out," she said. "Now, this is it," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "We unlock it, we end it." I didn't like it. The air was too heavy, the hum too loud. But before I could stop her, she slid the key into the slot and turned it. The room shook. The walls groaned, and the light from the altar flared, blinding us. The giggle turned into a scream, high and piercing, like 1,000 voices at once. I stumbled back, the crowbar slipping from my hand. Rachel grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. "We need to destroy it," she shouted over the noise. I swung the crowbar at the altar, the metal ringing against stone. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, and the scream grew louder, shaking the floor. Clara appeared in the doorway, her white dress stained with ash, her eyes blacker than before. She didn't move, just stared, her smile twisting into something monstrous. "Rachel, get back," I yelled, but she was already moving, pouring salt from her pouch onto the altar. The symbols glowed red, then faded, and the shaking stopped. For a moment, I thought we'd done it. Then Clara spoke, her voice a low growl that didn't belong to a child. "You can't leave." The room changed. The walls melted, stretching into a vast, dark void. The floor tilted, and I grabbed Rachel to keep from falling. Clara was everywhere now, her face in the shadows, her giggle in the air. The rules didn't matter anymore. We'd broken too many, and she was free. The sacrifice. Rachel's hand slipped from mine, and I turned to see her standing by the altar, the key glowing in her hand. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "I know what to do." Before I could stop her, she drove the key into the altar, deeper this time, twisting it until it snapped. The void shuddered, and Clara's scream became a wail. Light poured from the altar, blinding, burning. Rachel turned to me, her face pale but resolute. "Get out," she said. "Now, this is it," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "We unlock it, we end it." I didn't like it. The air was too heavy, the hum too loud. But before I could stop her, she slid the key into the slot and turned it. The room shook. The walls groaned, and the light from the altar flared, blinding us. The giggle turned into a scream, high and piercing, like 1,000 voices at once. I stumbled back, the crowbar slipping from my hand. Rachel grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. "We need to destroy it," she shouted over the noise. I swung the crowbar at the altar, the metal ringing against stone. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, and the scream grew louder, shaking the floor. Clara appeared in the doorway, her white dress stained with ash, her eyes blacker than before. She didn't move, just stared, her smile twisting into something monstrous. "Rachel, get back," I yelled, but she was already moving, pouring salt from her pouch onto the altar. The symbols glowed red, then faded, and the shaking stopped. For a moment, I thought we'd done it. Then Clara spoke, her voice a low growl that didn't belong to a child. "You can't leave." The room changed. The walls melted, stretching into a vast, dark void. The floor tilted, and I grabbed Rachel to keep from falling. Clara was everywhere now, her face in the shadows, her giggle in the air. The rules didn't matter anymore. We'd broken too many, and she was free. The sacrifice. Rachel's hand slipped from mine, and I turned to see her standing by the altar, the key glowing in her hand. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "I know what to do." Before I could stop her, she drove the key into the altar, deeper this time, twisting it until it snapped. The void shuddered, and Clara's scream became a wail. Light poured from the altar, blinding, burning. Rachel turned to me, her face pale but resolute. "Get out," she said. Now, I didn't move. I couldn't. But then I felt it, the hand on my shoulder, cold and heavy. Rule number 10. I didn't turn around, but I knew it was her. Rachel shouted something I couldn't hear, and the void collapsed, pulling her toward the altar. I lunged for her, but the light was too bright, the force too strong. When it faded, she was gone. The room was silent. The altar was cracked in half, the key broken inside it. Clara was nowhere to be seen. I stumbled out of 13B, my legs shaking, and made it to the elevator. It opened without a sound, and I collapsed inside, pressing the button for the lobby. The dial didn't stop at 13 this time. The aftermath. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door and sat there, staring at the wall. The mirrors were clear now, no shadows, no Clara. My watch was ticking normally again, the hands moving forward. The building was quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I tried to find Rachel. I called her phone, checked her apartment, even went back to the diner. Nothing. She was gone, like she'd never existed. I told myself she'd saved us, that her sacrifice had broken whatever hold the 13th floor had on the building. But I couldn't shake the guilt. I'd let her go in there, let her take the key, let her face Clara alone. The next day, I went to the library to return the records I'd borrowed. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes, asked if I'd found what I was looking for. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I left, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo of Rachel, smiling, standing in front of Hawthorne Towers. On the back, in her handwriting, it said, "If I don't make it, keep going. You're stronger than you think." I moved out a week later. I couldn't stay in 12C, not with the memories of that hallway, that giggle, that void. I sold the apartment at a loss, but I didn't care. I needed to be free. I rented a place in Queens, a modern building with no history, no shadows. The nightmares faded, and the whispers stopped. I started sleeping again, though I still check the mirrors sometimes, just in case. Hawthorne Towers is still there, looming over the Bronx like a tombstone. I drive past it sometimes, but I never stop. The elevator doesn't go to 13 anymore, or so I've heard. But I know better than to trust it. Some doors, once opened, never really close.